You're not alone, and really it's confronting the base of that fear, because there's some deeper root cause, and the imposter syndrome that you're feeling is just a symptom of that deeper root cause. You have to accept who you are to begin to feel comfortable, to begin to overcome any feelings of that imposter syndrome.
It's about you showing up as you, not you showing up as a version of you I think you should be, or that you think you should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Full Circle, the Magic Mindset Podcast. I'm excited to be bringing this podcast to you today. I'm Leah Lilly, joined by my co-host, Matt Carlberg, and we are bringing you a little bit of astrology and psychology and how those two things fit together. I am an astrologer. I've been working in this field for quite a while, and I look at the planets and the stars and gain an understanding of the energy that's working within the world and the unique energy that works within each of us, and try to make that a little bit more accessible for people. I'm a seer of souls and a granter of gifts, and I use astrology to do that. I'm joined today by my co-host, Matt Carlberg, who is not only an incredible friend of mine, but also very versed in the world of psychology.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the unique thing about this, is that we each get to bring two halves of that whole. And my background, I studied psychology, I studied sociology, and I studied organizational communications. I've spent the majority of my career working in things like human resources and communications and change management. So it's all about understanding people and applying that in a practical way. And I think that it's one of the things that we hope makes this podcast interesting to you, and hopefully gives you some takeaways that you can apply in your day-to-day life. And today's theme is an excellent one for us to start on, because we want to talk about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is really the idea that you don't belong, or that you don't actually know what you're doing. And Leah, I don't know about you, but I don't know that I feel fully qualified to have a podcast, let alone, be speaking to any number of people in an audience about mental well-being and things like that. But I think from our introductions, we actually are relatively qualified, at least, to put things out there into this sphere of information.
I mean, does anybody out there who has a podcast feel qualified? I think it's something that we come up against when we have something to share and wonder if we're the ones that should be sharing it. And that definitely comes up, when it comes to this podcast and sharing things. But also, we both gained knowledge and experience in the fields we've kind of chosen to focus on, and our experience in that is important. And no matter where you are in the process of that, sharing that and putting it out there.
But I think that's one of the great things about this, right, is we explore our thoughts and share those thoughts on this podcast. It's an opportunity for us to get a deeper understanding of those things as well. So maybe, when we walk away from the podcast today, and then the episode next week that will round out our conversation on imposter syndrome, we can share some of the things that we've dealt with and things that we've thought about over the course of that period of time, and see what's going on.
It's an interesting thing just to sit with in general, and kind of be like, okay, yeah, that's maybe where we're at, is like feeling that way and seeing where it comes up. So I'm looking forward to that part of the journey of this podcast.
So speaking about where things come up, I would be very interested to know, from an astrological perspective, what's going on. Where are we at this week?
So astrologically right now, the sun is in Leo, meaning that we are in the midst of Leo season, which is a very playful, fun, energetic sort of purpose focused time. A lot of those things come up just generally during the season, and each of us, based on our personal astrology, react differently to the sort of questions and energy that Leo season brings up. But we're kind of focused on shining and how we shine and how we put our truth out into the world. There's sort of a brave, confident, outgoing energy that's happening right now that's really exciting to tap into. But the flip side of Leo, and the thing that Leo also reminds us, is that on one side you've got this like energy that's like, I'm gonna go for this goal, I'm gonna do this thing, I'm gonna put the energy in. It's Leo's represented by the lion, and that's not by accident, right? Because the lion sometimes is hunting, going for that goal, sort of planning how they're gonna chase down their prey, and then they exert the effort and they do it, they go for it. And then, other times you find the lion hanging out with the pride and just resting, catching up on sleep, being around, the people that or the other lions, I guess, that they've chosen to sort of be in their pack. So it's a really good reminder to look for where you might be burning out and find time to go after what it is you're going after, but also take the time to sort of rest and connect with people. And so that's kind of a general big energy that's happening. And then, also knowing where the moon is. Last week, on Thursday, we had our full moon in Aquarius. That brought up a lot of big life questions. Maybe some big action needs to be taken somewhere in your life, and you were kind of looking at that. And funny enough, Leo and Aquarius are two opposite energies on the zodiac wheel. So having those two things at play can feel like there's sort of opposing forces at work. And in a lot of ways there is, but in opposing forces, there is always something to learn. It's like, okay, what's in that makes these two things similar connect?
We've talked obviously about Leo season and Cancer season, and before that I wasn't really super in tune with the seasons. I don't really know what came before that, but when we've talked about Leo season before, we haven't talked as much about kind of the pride, right? The group of other lions that you're with. I think that's a pride, and I'm wondering, is it kind of group focused in that way? Like, is there some element of that? Because I've always viewed these seasons as like a very personal experience that other people are experiencing together but separately. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Different seasons prompt different social interaction and levels of social interaction. So, one of the seasons that is the most social to me is Gemini. Gemini is a sign that sort of learns through conversation and communicating. So when we're in Gemini season, meeting new people, going to events where there are lots of different people, getting in social situations where there are sort of crowds really, is a big part of Gemini season. But Leo season is different because while Leo season is still social in a way, it's more loving interaction. It's more deep connection and maybe a little bit more one-on-one connection. You also find that sometimes in like, this is my core group of friends. Like, these are my people. This is my pride, like that sort of thing. So each zodiac sign is going to have different levels of interaction, and that's kind of the one we're playing with during Leo season.
I think one of the things that you said that was really interesting to me, when we consider the theme with imposter syndrome, is finding the people in Leo season that you're comfortable being around, right? And when we think about imposter syndrome, that's one of the keys to kind of, put it in air quotes, I guess, but defeating the imposter syndrome. And I think that this podcast presents an opportunity for us to kind of defeat that together. And I think that it's one of the things that we together are really looking to get out of this podcast and bring to anyone who might be listening to it. And I think that that's what this is for. It gets us to step out of our comfort zone and really think about the things that we're encountering in our day-to-day lives, whether it's imposter syndrome or future topics like emotional labor and things like that. Um, so
Right.
does that resonate for you?
It's a great way to sort of go through our own experience and see where this applies to us too, and know that just as much as we are experiencing it like other people have experienced it, we, and we hope that those who are listening find some level of resonance as well, just as we have found it in talking to each other about these sort of things. So, knowing that there's a commonality between us must mean that there's more commonality out there. We each have a story to tell, and we each have experience that is valuable. And the more of us that share that, the more we're able to connect and help each other and provide healing and comfort and sort of that feeling of, exactly like you said, like having that pride. Like, these people have been through it too. Like, we've all been through stuff and seen stuff and experienced stuff, and that's valuable. That's valuable. And finding the people that reflect the beauty in your experience back to you, and the people that you feel comfortable reflecting the beauty in their experience back to them. And that sort of is, I think, what a pride is like, I see you, you see me, and we just let it exist as it is. And when you do that, like you said, imposter syndrome sort of fades into the background, because it's about you showing up as you, not you showing up as a version of you I think you should be, or that you think you should be.
Yeah, putting on putting on the face, right?
Yeah. And I think that's something really valuable that we found in our friendship over the years that we've been friends, is like, I see you and all the things that you are, and you see me and all the things that I am. And it's like, cool. That makes up this awesome person that I know. And I wish we could see more of us could see each other like that. I wish we could all see each other like that. Sometimes it's hard. So, speaking of awesome people, we have come to the part in our episode where we get to highlight an awesome small business. And this week we get to highlight one of my favorite small businesses, which is High Vibe Healing Gems. It's owned by my wonderful friend Carly, and she provides high quality crystals from trusted sources, gemstone jewelry, and mala beads for meditation and intention. She established her business 3 years ago and is thriving on Etsy. It's incredible to see. So if you're looking to learn more about crystals, or introduce crystal healing into your life, or just have crystals in your house, Carly is definitely the place to get them. So highly recommend checking out her business. We will have links for you to check out on our social media and on our page and on our website, so that you're able to get there and give Carly some love. Carly not only does a really good job of supplying a bunch of different crystals, but she also has a lot of information on what they're good for in crystal healing. She is an incredible healer herself. So not only are you getting beautiful crystals, but from somebody who knows a lot about them too. Do you have any crystals, Matt? What's your favorite crystal? What's your crystal life like? Tell me everything.
My crystal life is severely lacking. I actually, when I found out that this was kind of the small business that we were talking about this week, I I got a little bit excited because I think crystals are interesting from two perspectives. One, I think when we think about the magic part of the magic mindset, I mean, people really they resonate with these. They feel confident that these things are helping them in the ways that they're supposed to, right? I think crystals have different purposes. But I
Mhm.
think even for those of us that maybe are not as in tune with the magic side of things, I think that there's benefit to them, because earlier I was talking about mindfulness. And if you have, if you're wearing a crystal, or if you've got one sitting next to your computer while you work, or whatever it may be, it's sitting there reminding you of its purpose, even if you don't believe in kind of the magical stuff that we're talking about, right? And so I think they're beneficial to everybody, no matter what.
Analytical people are some of my favorite people to talk to about crystal stuff, because they're like, oh, well, you're just carrying around a bunch of rocks. And it's like, you're not wrong. Yeah, these are rocks. These are of the earth. Like, these are rocks. But at the same time, like you said, it promotes a mindful intention toward thinking about, if you're carrying a rose quartz crystal for love, you're thinking more about how can I show love? How can I receive love? Like, it just puts your mind in a different place. So even if you don't believe necessarily that the stone itself has any sort of magical capability or property, which I get, I don't necessarily partake in that belief, but it's fine. I think rocks are magical. Then it's still, enacting a purpose for you. And I think that can be really powerful.
The goal of the podcast is really to bring together these two worlds of psychology and astrology about the theme that we want to focus on for the week. And so what I really want to do is dig deeper into imposter syndrome from a psychological perspective. And then I would love to hear kind of your side of things to make it sound maybe more divisive than it is. But from a psychological perspective, imposter syndrome is just the fear of being exposed as a fraud. And so from my background, when I think about it, I often think about people that, get a job out of school or get a promotion, and they sit down for their first day of work and realize, oh my goodness, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think that the important thing here is to remember that that fear is a very natural feeling. We experience fear from pushing boundaries, from growth in both our personal and professional lives. And one of the statistics that I found, and I'll explain why there aren't very many in a second, but one of the statistics that I found is that 70% of people experience this imposter syndrome at some point in their lives, which I think, we've kind of in preparation for this, kind of throughout various conversations, talked about how that number seems incredibly low. So the reason that it is one of the few statistics out there, and kind of there's a little bit of guesswork from a psychology perspective here, is because imposter syndrome is not diagnosable. It currently is not in the DSM, which is the tool that psychologists use for diagnosing whether it's disorders or things like that. But I do think that there are some really interesting psychological concepts that we can apply to imposter syndrome to help us understand it a little bit better and maybe understand some things that we can do differently. The concept that I want to focus on is called learned helplessness. And learned helplessness has been studied pretty substantially, and there's a lot of other concepts that tie into it. But at its base, there was a study that was done where they put dogs in basically a pen, and the floor, and this was before we did a whole lot of ethics in psychology, but the floor was, it would hit the dog's feet with electric shocks. And the way the study was set up, some dogs learned, I cannot escape this. And so even when they were given a way to escape it, they sat on the floor and whined because it doesn't feel good. But other dogs that hadn't been brought up with the idea that they can't escape these shocks, when they were presented with a way to escape, they did. And so I think here the key is to understand that there are actions that you can take to resolve this imposter syndrome, to overcome it. And I think for me, the solutions are basically recognize that you're not alone, acknowledge the feeling, as we should acknowledge all feelings, and then move forward with an actionable next step. And that actionable next step might be educating yourself to remove insecurity. It might be communicating with another person to understand that you're not alone. And really it's confronting the base of that fear, because there's some deeper root cause, and the imposter syndrome that you're feeling is just a symptom of that deeper root cause. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on some of that from your kind of astrology perspective.
It's interesting to hear about it from a psychological standpoint, because we don't often break imposter syndrome down into these sort of parts of like, well, what is it comprised of? Like, what does it actually mean? And we see the Band-Aid that gets slapped over it, which is fake it till you make it. Just, it's okay to feel like you're faking it. just sort of, push through it, get through it, versus going to the root cause, which is, well, why do you feel like you have to fake it in the first place? And that's sort of where imposter syndrome comes in. And one of the really beautiful things about this podcast is that our experiences as the two hosts of this podcast are so different. I work in the self-employed sort of world, so I see a different side of what this looks like. And on my end of things in the work that I do, I think a lot of imposter syndrome comes for a lot of the women business owners I see, because we're creating something that doesn't necessarily already exist. And so that can create a lot of fear around, okay, well, who am I to say any of this? How would I know? And then that imposter syndrome comes up. You start feeling that way. And the thing that I've experienced that puts that in a different perspective for me is the astrology part of it, which is that we all have different instincts, and we all have different intuition and different messages that come up to us, but we're so scared to act on those because society tells us this is the right way to success, or comparison tells us if you're not doing what she's doing, you're not doing it right. So it comes from second guessing your own instincts, and we're taught to do that because it's sort of drilled over and over that mistakes are bad, or at least in my experience, that's sort of what I learned. And I think, some people can resonate with that experience of not wanting to make mistakes. I think it's also a Virgo thing, perfectionist, like, hello, that's just what I'm working with. It's part of knowing myself. Again, part of my astrology, knowing that that's something that I'm working with. It's like, okay, perfectionism is kind of written into the sort of equation for me. How can I use that to my advantage, but also be aware of when it's sabotaging me? And when it's sabotaging me, it's in that sort of imposter syndrome realm. So we have to let our own instincts lead, and that your instincts can be found in your personal astrology, sort of in the astrology that's going on in general. By just getting to know what energies are at work, you can better understand your relation to anything, but in this case, like imposter syndrome. So for me, it was about learning that making mistakes is okay, sort of putting that perfectionism to the side. And I know we all have different levels of that too. And then also making peace with your past and past trauma. And that's all housed in your birth chart too. And noticing where in your path up until this point, you've sort of experienced those moments of imposter syndrome, and noticing where it comes from within your life so that you're not holding on to it. Because it can be one thing to sort of acknowledge it on the surface and say, okay, cool, I realize that I feel imposter syndrome, so like I'm just not going to feel that anymore. And I don't necessarily know that we're able to do that, right? It's more of a practice. And by practicing noticing when it comes up and noticing what comes up for you when it does, and finding the places within you where that's housed and still comes up as a pattern because you get triggered, letting yourself practice letting that go. Really what I've come to realize in the astrology world about it is that when you're feeling imposter syndrome, we can look, and you can look into your astrology to see the points where you need to sort of rise to the occasion of practicing having a little bit more confidence in yourself and your skills, and knowing what those are. Because a lot of imposter syndrome too is just not knowing yourself and what you're working with, and the strengths that you can put weight behind to say, no, I'm actually really good at these things. I really do feel like I have these things on lock. And, if you're like me, you whip out your birth chart and you're like, and they're right here. I can show you. I can show you where it says I'm good at this. So, having a little bit of pride in yourself. And that, brings us back to sort of Leo season 2 of like, this is the time to be exploring that and be exploring who you are and what makes you up, and having confidence in that, because imposter syndrome, might be being triggered around this time, and noticing if it's coming up for you and where, and sort of using astrology and psychology to say, okay, now that I know this is here and showing up here, how can I take my power back? Like, are you going to let imposter syndrome run your life, or are you going to run are you going to run it? Like, you kind of have to decide at some point.
Can I just say, I love that you've brought it full circle back to Leo season. Do you see what I did there?
Yay!
Look at that. So, Leia, I think to bridge the gap here a little bit, we said very, very similar things from different perspectives. And I think that the key, at least that I'm pulling away from this conversation, is you need to acknowledge that the feeling is there, and then use, whether that's the internal power or whatever conversations or however you're going to address it, but acknowledge that the feeling exists, and then just move forward from there, and take steps to solve the root cause of the
Yeah.
issue. And luckily you're in Leo season to do it, right?
Yeah, and just to add on to that, when you recognize it, do your best not to judge it. I mean, we are so hard on ourselves, and trust me, Virgo season is coming up. You have plenty of time to be hard on yourself. Just to let you know, that's coming up on Friday. So you have all the time in the world to be hard on yourself. Be gentle. It's like, okay, I notice that I don't feel confident in my work. I feel like an imposter there. Okay, awesome. That recognition is huge. You don't need to judge it, because the first thing your brain wants to do is be like, yeah, and here's 5,000 other reasons why you're horrible. And it's like, whoa. Didn't ask for any of that. Didn't need any of that right now. All I was doing was noticing that I don't feel confident in this area right now. Boom, that's it. And just notice what that brings up for you. When you want to start doing something about it is when you look at it, through the lenses we just presented, the psychological perspective, the astrological perspective, and you find what resonates with you and go down that rabbit hole so that you can explore it. But yeah, it's a supported time to explore it. Just be gentle with yourself as you do. Like, don't be too hard on yourself. Love yourself.
Awesome. I think that's like an excellent kind of capstone there. I don't know if I'm using that word correctly, but kind of capping off the conversation there is at least how I meant it. And I think now there's like a couple things that we want to make sure that we do in each of our podcast episodes. And I think the first one is tarot, which was my first exposure to kind of the world of astrology and the magic of the magic mindset. And Leia, I was wondering if you would be interested in pulling a tarot card for us.
Yes, I would love to. We're excited about bringing this part to each podcast because it keeps a little bit of engagement with the magic going on, which is important to me and, important to both of us.
So, Leia, as we think about the tarot card that you're about to pull for us, it might be useful, especially for those of us that haven't had as much experience with the magic side of the Full Circle podcast. How do we use the information that this card and you are going to tell us?
It will all make sense. Like, it will just speak to you in the way that it needs to speak to you. That's the really great thing about tarot, is that, or oracle cards in general, is that I provide an interpretation of what that means, and you find the place that it resonates for you and where it needs application in your life in general.
So it's kind of like a little beacon, like a guide for us to follow until like next time we meet and do another tarot pull.
Yeah, just something to think about. So this week I pulled 8 of Cups, and I will put a picture of this on our website so that you can see what it looks like, because the imagery of this card is really powerful. 8 of Cups has to do with the present situation. Maybe it's where you are now, something in your life, a person in your life. There's something that's no longer providing you any fulfillment. And it might be emotional fulfillment, it might be experience, it might be knowledge. You're just not getting something from it anymore. So essentially, the cups are empty. It's time to walk away. And we get very nervous about walking away because, and like this card so beautifully represents in the picture, there's this sort of figure walking away from these 8 empty cups into the distance, and the distance is very unclear. And that's what keeps us from leaving certain situations, is because we're not sure of what the outcome looks like and we're too afraid. Kind of has to do with, what we've been talking about today, imposter syndrome, right? Like walking away from this belief that's no longer serving you. And that belief is, I can't do it. I'm not qualified. I'm not, whatever that is, finding what that is and walking away from it, because it's empty cups. It's empty cups. You're not getting anything from it. So noticing where that comes up for you around imposter syndrome, noticing where that comes up for you in your life in general, also separate from imposter syndrome, because Leo season is about dropping into your purpose and your truth and what is true for you, what it is you want, what it is you need. And when the clearer you get about that, the more you're able to see what's not within that scope, or what's not helping you, and let that go so that you can orient yourself toward what it is you do want.
I like the imagery of the empty cups. I'm a fan of that message. And I think I can tack on a little bit, perhaps using the empty cups metaphor here from a psychology perspective, starting to fill those cups with more, I don't want to say useful, because I think the emptiness is useful, but different things, filling those cups with different things. The way that I'd like to share is kind of through this psychological wellness tip of the week. For this week, I wanted to focus on one of the pillars of Carol Riff's 6-factor model of psychological well-being. And so I imagine over the course of this podcast, we'll get through all 6. But the first one is self-acceptance. And I think if you've taken nothing from the last half hour of us talking to each other, it's that you have to accept who you are to begin to feel comfortable, to begin to overcome any feelings of that imposter syndrome that you might be feeling. That's almost where I would want to leave today, is with the idea of self-acceptance as that final takeaway, and using that self-acceptance to move on and overcome any of these imposter feelings that you might be having.
Yeah. Get to know yourself, get to love yourself, use what remainder we have of Leo season to kind of dive into that process. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to learn more about the podcast or us, you can find us on Facebook at Full Circle Podcast. We want to connect with you and hear your experiences and feelings around imposter syndrome. We're hoping to create a community there to engage around our episodes, so please join us. You can also find more information about the podcast at lealily.com/Full Circle Podcast. That's LEALILY.com/Full Circle Podcast. And we're also on Twitter, and you can follow us there at @fullcircle_pod. Thanks again for joining us. We put out new episodes every Monday, so we'll talk to you next week.